They thought he was just an old man behind the wheel of a rusty truck. But when they opened his trailer, they didn't expect what came next. Who was this silent driver? And why did 50 soldiers show up to defend him? Stay with us to uncover the story of a man whose past turned a roadside stop into a moment of honor. The sun was just beginning to claw its way above the tree line when Robert Moranis turned off the highway and onto County Route 12, a narrow, cracked road that ran behind the hills like a forgotten vein. The world was quiet at that hour, just birdsong and the low growl of his 1975 rig, its long hood stretching forward like a steel snout, chrome dulled by age but not by pride. Inside the cab, the smell of old leather and machine oil mingled with a hint of pipe tobacco. The dashboard was worn smooth in places, the gauges steady, reliable. Taped to the sun visor was a black and white photo of a young man in uniform, arms slung over the shoulder of another soldier, both squinting into the sun somewhere far from here. Next to it, a yellowing slip of paper bore a quote in faded ink: "Do the job, carry the weight, leave no one behind." Robert's hands, thick and calloused, gripped the wheel with the ease of decades. He wasn't in a hurry. His deliveries were always on time, and Frank would be waiting with a handshake and maybe a cup of coffee. The warehouse in Iron Ridge was a good place, tight run, no nonsense. The kind of place where a man like Robert still felt useful. But that morning, as the road curved toward an old checkpoint used mostly for local patrols, 2 sheriff's deputies stood beside a cruiser, sipping coffee from foam cups. One of them, Deputy Shane Caldwell, barely 30, looked up as the truck rolled closer. His brow furrowed. The vehicle was out of place. No digital tracking hub, no fleet ID or an electronic log display. Just a slab-nosed, fire-engine red rig that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Old school," Shane muttered, nudging his partner. "You see that?" Deputy Tyler Jennings, newer to the force, shrugged. "Looks like a relic. Probably doesn't even pass emissions." They flagged him down with a raised hand and a flash of red and blue from the cruiser. Robert saw them, slowed the rig, and shifted down with mechanical precision. The truck hissed to a stop, and he opened the cab door slowly, stepping down with care but without hesitation. Shane approached, his tone neutral but watchful. "Good morning, sir. Mind telling us where you're headed?" Robert looked him in the eye. "Iron Ridge Supply Depot. Got paperwork?" Robert reached into the cab and handed over a clipboard with signed manifests, inventory logs, and a neatly folded bill of lading. His movements were deliberate, his face unreadable. Shane glanced at it but barely skimmed before asking, "This your truck?" Robert nodded once. Shane squinted at the Kenworth. "Bit old for the road, isn't it?" Tyler circled the truck, peering into the rearview mirrors, trying to catch a glimpse of the trailer's interior. "What are you hauling?" "Emergency supplies, tools, filtration units, military surplus." He paused. "For the warehouse. They'll confirm." Shane handed the clipboard back, but didn't move. "Mind if we take a look inside the trailer?" Robert's jaw flexed slightly. "You got a reason to suspect I'm carrying something illegal?" Shane didn't answer directly. "Just a routine check, sir. You understand, vehicle like this, no electronic logs, no plate scanner tag. Doesn't exactly match anything we've seen come through." Robert didn't argue. He walked slowly toward the rear, unlocked the door, and pulled it open. The trailer was pristine. Rows of sealed crates, each labeled and strapped down properly. Everything aligned. Everything documented. Still, the deputies exchanged a glance. Shane climbed in to check a few of the boxes. Tyler stayed behind, now scanning the front cab. His eyes caught on the photos taped inside, the medals clipped to a piece of cloth behind the seat. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Logistics Command insignia. "You military?" Tyler asked through the open window. "Retired," Robert said. Shane hopped down. "Sir, we're going to have to call this in. Just standard procedure. You can stay in the cab if you like." Robert didn't move. "You've got the paperwork. The cargo's clean. I'm expected." Shane crossed his arms. "You've also got a 50-year-old truck and no electronic tracking. With everything going on in the state lately, we can't afford to assume." Robert's eyes narrowed. not in anger, but in the quiet, practiced way of a man who's seen assumptions cost lives. He stepped up into his cab, sat down, and stared forward. Inside the cruiser, Shane radioed dispatch while Tyler stayed by the trailer. The exchange wasn't heated, but it lingered with discomfort. Locals began to slow as they passed, curious about the commotion. One elderly couple pulled over to ask if everything was okay, only to be waved off. Back in the cab, Robert pulled a leather-bound notebook from the glove compartment. On its cover, an embossed emblem, Red Horse Battalion, 1971. He flipped it open to a page filled with scribbled names, some crossed out, some underlined. He stared at the page for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. But the way his fingers tightened around the pen told a different story. He had driven through deserts under fire, through monsoons with washed-out bridges, through jungles where the road had no name. And now, on a quiet county road, two young men in crisp uniforms questioned whether he still belonged behind the wheel. Outside, Shane stepped back from the radio. "Base says they're looking into it," he said to Tyler. Back at the warehouse, Frank had been watching the clock without realizing it. When the expected rumble of the Kenworth didn't echo through the yard, something twisted in his gut. He checked the gate, called the front desk. Nothing. Then, almost by reflex, he flipped on the old CB set mounted in his office wall, a relic he hadn't used in some time. Static. Until a passing trucker casually mentioned, "Some cops got an old-timer pulled over on Route 12. Real classic rig, too." Frank stood up fast, his hand already on the mic. "Bob, that you stuck on Route 12? This is Frank. Confirm. Over." Robert leaned forward, pressed the button. "Affirmative. Two deputies flagged me. Routine check, they say." There was a pause. Then Frank's voice again, more urgent. "Sit tight. Making a call. Don't go anywhere." Robert leaned back in his seat. He knew Frank wouldn't just make a call. The man had connections, the kind that didn't ask twice. Outside, Shane watched the old man through the windshield, still uneasy. And far in the distance, on the far edge of the hills, a low rumble began to stir. But for now, the road remained quiet, and Robert Moranis waited. At exactly 7:04 a.m., Frank Delaney checked his watch for the third time. It wasn't just a habit, it was discipline, drilled into him during a military career coordinating supply routes across half the globe. Now retired and managing the Iron Ridge Supply Depot, Frank had turned that same precision to civilian logistics. Every delivery, every arrival, every outbound crate, everything ran like a field operation. But Robert Moranis was late. Not by much, just 17 minutes, but that wasn't like him. Robert was the kind of man who showed up exactly when he said he would. Not early, not late, exact. Every time. He didn't ask why they stopped him. He didn't need to. Robert's truck, though lovingly maintained, looked like a relic. And Robert himself, he was the kind of man who didn't beg for respect but expected it to be earned. Frank knew how that could come across to younger officers with no context. He remembered one time he saw Robert, the desert outpost in Kuwait, 1991, after a roadside bomb had taken out their water supply convoy. It was Robert Sergeant First Class Moranis who rerouted and hand-delivered the replacement units by nightfall, driving through unsecured territory without a radio escort. That delivery had saved 30 lives. One of them was Frank's. Frank snatched his phone off the desk and dialed an old number from memory. It still worked. A sleepy voice answered. "Fort Dominion, officer on duty. This is Frank Delaney, retired logistics. I need to speak to Captain Elise Ramirez, immediately." "Sir, she's not. Tell her this. Sergeant Robert Moranis has been detained on Route 12 by local police. I don't know what they think he's done, but if she still cares about who kept her father alive in 1985, she'll get moving. Now." There was a beat of silence. Then, "Hold one moment, sir." Frank hung up. He didn't need to say more. Back on Route 12, Robert remained seated in his cab, still and silent. The two deputies paced outside, tension lingering. The trailer door hung open, revealing meticulously stacked crates, emergency filters, solar battery packs, dry rations, and sealed medical kits. Deputy Tyler climbed into the trailer, prying open a crate with his pocket knife. Inside were carefully wrapped units, serial numbers intact, nothing illegal in sight. He held one up, confused. These are clean. Military issue. Surplus, not black market. They insisted that Robert was hiding something, like some contraband or some untaxed product. Shane, outside the cab, frowned. Then why no company name? Why's he driving solo? Why no GPS log? Who hauls critical supply freight without modern tracking? He's old school, Tyler said. Maybe just old. Robert's voice drifted from the cab window. Everything you're looking at is approved. Manifests on the dash. Call the depot if you're still unsure. Shane didn't like it. Something about the man's confidence irritated him. Not arrogance, confidence. The kind that came from knowing more than you did, and knowing you'd never catch up. Before Shane could reply, a deep rumble echoed faintly over the hills. Tyler turned. What's that? Both deputies looked toward the horizon. First nothing. Then a shimmer of movement, distant glints of metal, dust clouds. Then came the sound, low, rhythmic engine growls, 10 at least. Getting closer. The sight that emerged moments later was surreal. 10 military Humvees, tan-painted, loaded with gear and personnel, rolled down the road in formation. Flags fluttered from the antennae. In the lead vehicle, a black SUV bore Fort Dominion's insignia on the front plate. They didn't know what to expect, but they figured this suspicion about Robert and his rig could cost them dearly. The convoy rolled to a halt in perfect formation, raising a thin cloud of dust that hovered briefly in the morning air before drifting off over the fields. Every engine idled in sync, their low grumble resonating through the cracked pavement of Route 12. At the center of it all stood Captain Elise Ramirez, already out of the lead Humvee before it came to a full stop. She moved with sharp, purposeful steps across the gravel shoulder toward the parked Kenworth. Her uniform was immaculate. Pressed creases, polished boots, silver captain's bars gleaming on her collar. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight braid beneath her cap, and her expression left no room for doubt. She was here with intent. As she reached the cab, the crowd that had started gathering, warehouse workers, passing motorists, even a few of the deputy's colleagues, watched in silence. They expected confrontation. Instead, they witnessed something rare. Elise came to a halt and snapped to attention. "Sergeant Robert Moranis, sir," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "It's an honor to stand before you." Robert, still seated behind the wheel, looked down at her through the open window. For a moment, his weathered face gave away nothing. But then he moved, slow, deliberate, swinging the door open and stepping down from the cab. He stood tall despite the years, and for the first time that morning, his eyes were truly alert. "You're Manny's girl," he said, more statement than question. Elise nodded. "Yes, sir. You delivered water and power cells to his unit under enemy fire. Northern Iraq, 1985. He told that story every Christmas until the day he died. A beat passed. Then Robert nodded once, his jaw set firm. "Didn't think anyone remembered. We don't forget the ones who carried us home," she replied. Behind her, 2 uniformed soldiers stepped forward carrying a shadow box case, polished mahogany with a velvet interior. Nestled inside was a newly minted bronze star, a purple heart ribbon, and a replacement for the Red Horse Logistics pin. The original had been lost in a supply drop evacuation during a monsoon in Southeast Asia, 1972. The moment the case was unveiled, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stopped. Even the deputies stood motionless, their earlier skepticism dissolving into something quieter. Humility. She explained that the box had been kept and would be delivered to Robert, but that she thought this would be a unique opportunity to show the community how important he was. Captain Ramirez turned to address the assembly. "This man," she said, voice now projecting across the growing circle of onlookers, orchestrated missions that kept entire units alive in hostile terrain. No weapons, no glory, just grit, judgment, and sacrifice. He didn't do it for rank or attention. He did it because the job needed doing. She turned to Robert and offered the case. He didn't take it at first, just stared at the pin resting inside. Time seemed to slow. Finally, Robert reached out and ran his fingers over the surface of the case. Then he took it gently in his hands and looked back at her. "Thank you, Captain," he said. "That pin was the last thing my crew gave me before we split. Thought it was gone for good." Behind the crowd, Deputy Shane Caldwell stood slightly apart. He watched the exchange with a tight jaw, shoulders squared, but his gaze was far less sure than before. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped closer and pulled Elise aside as the soldiers began handing out bottled water and setting up folding chairs from the support vehicles. He kept his voice low. "I owe you an apology," Shane said. "I didn't know who he was. We thought maybe he was just another burnout holding up traffic." Elise's expression softened, but only slightly. "Don't feel bad for not recognizing a hero," she said. "Feel bad that we don't teach people how to see them." Shane nodded, ashamed. "I'll do better." "Make sure you do," she replied. Meanwhile, the local news crew, alerted by Frank, arrived just in time to catch the moment Robert finally pinned the medal to his faded jacket. One of the soldiers raised a bugle and began playing taps. Not because it was a funeral, but because the moment felt sacred. The music rose through the trees and silenced even the wind. Robert stood perfectly still. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not a relic, not a curiosity, but a man whose history had finally marched forward to meet him in the light. The warehouse crew had been standing by the loading dock for over an hour, but when Robert's 1975 rig finally rumbled into view, sunlight glinting off its polished chrome, American flag fluttering from a bracket near the exhaust stack, they stood a little taller. No one spoke, not even the forklift drivers. They just watched as the old rig eased into the bay with a gentle hiss of brakes, like a warhorse returning from battle. Frank Delaney stepped forward, his hands tucked into the waistband of his cargo vest. His eyes, glassy with age and memory, locked on the man climbing down from the cab. The years hadn't dulled the recognition. "Still parking straighter than my rookies," Frank muttered, chuckling. Robert dropped to the pavement and turned. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Two veterans, 2 decades of dust, wars, and long nights between them. Then Frank stepped in and pulled him into a tight embrace. "You old ghost," he said. "You show up like the past in a steel frame." Robert didn't answer right away. He just patted Frank's back once and looked toward the warehouse entrance, where half a dozen young workers stood watching, some with phones out, others with their caps over their hearts. "Delivery's on time," Robert said. "Some minutes late, maybe, but I had to take a detour through history." Frank laughed. "Well, we signed for it, with a convoy escort, no less." Inside the warehouse, the crates were quickly offloaded: emergency rations, filtration gear, spare parts, field tools. But the real cargo Robert had brought that day wasn't inside the trailer. It was something quieter, a reminder, shared through action, that experience isn't rust, it's armor. Across town, at the local sheriff's station, a very different kind of unloading was happening. In the main conference room, Deputies Shane Caldwell and Tyler Reeves sat among 20 other officers, watching a newly prepared training video titled, "Veterans in the Community, Recognition and Respect." On the screen, clips played from the incident, Robert's salute, Captain Ramirez's words, and crowd reactions, interspersed with testimonials from retired service members and footage of logistics convoys in wartime. Sheriff Danielle Wright stood at the front, hands folded. "We failed that man," she said plainly. "Not because of negligence, but ignorance. That ends now." She paced slowly. "From this point forward, every member of this department will complete a veteran recognition module. You'll learn to spot insignias, understand the silent signs of service, and more importantly, you'll learn to ask, not assume." Tyler leaned toward Shane and whispered, "You think he'll ever talk to us again?" Shane looked at the screen, where Robert's weathered face filled the frame, stoic, unreadable, proud. "I don't know," he replied. but I know we owe him more than an apology. A week later, a quiet ceremony was held at the Iron Ridge Elementary School library. No fanfare, no press. A small group of students and staff gathered as a large, carefully packed crate was delivered to the school's history room. Inside was a fully restored 1940s military field radio, its brass knobs and olive drab panels gleaming like it had just come off the battlefield. Attached to the radio was a single typed card, paper yellowed slightly from the sun. This radio once carried orders that saved lives. Today, let it carry lessons that prevent silence. RM respect travels farther than trucks. Principal Monroe read the note aloud and looked to Frank, who had delivered the package on Robert's behalf. Will he be attending the Veterans Day event next month? Frank shook his head with a small smile. Bob doesn't do stages. He delivers. Then he rolls. That same evening, as the sun dipped low behind the tree line, streaking the sky with orange and gold, Robert Moranis drove west along County Route 14. The Kenworth's long hood gleamed in the light, and the chrome mirrors caught every flash of sunset. In the passenger seat sat a paper bag with 2 ham sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and the folded note a child had handed him days earlier. He kept the CB radio off. The road was quiet. As he passed the edge of town, a group had gathered at the side of the road. Frank, a few warehouse workers, and some of the deputies, including Shane. They didn't wave. They just stood, hands at their sides or over their hearts, watching as the old truck roared past one last time. Robert didn't honk. He didn't nod. He just kept going, his silhouette slowly swallowed by the orange horizon. Because for men like Robert Moranis, the road never really ends. It just stretches further, carrying not just cargo, but memory, honor, and the weight of every mile already traveled. This story reminds us that the quietest people often carry the deepest stories and the heaviest burdens. If you were one of those officers, how would you have reacted to Robert? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful stories from the roads less traveled. See you in the next video.